So I think, yeah, conscious of people's time. I know for those of you that are in the UK, it's already 4 o'clock. So I will share my screen and then we can get started. So let's see here. Okay. So welcome to the latest in our Masterclass series. This is turning predictability metrics into business impact. So you're with myself today. So I'm Dowd. Sorry, I'm Dowd. I'm part of the customer success team here at Plandek. This is part of the Masterclass series where we dive into the 4 pillars of our productivity framework. So today we're focused on predictability. Um, and so I hope you find this session incredibly useful. So before we dive into today's topic, I just want to give a quick refresher on the platform, on the productivity framework, in case you weren't able to join our last session. So at Plandek, we structure engineering productivity around 4 core pillars. So those are speed, how quickly value is delivered from ideation to production. Think metrics like cycle time and lead time to merge. Quality, how well we build. So that includes metrics like bug count, defect resolution time, and rework. And then focus, our team spending time on right work. And this pillar looks at investment profile and flow efficiency. But the one we're focusing on today is predictability. Can teams deliver what they plan when they plan it? And that is the focus of today's session. So the pillars altogether provide sort of a balanced, data-driven framework to assess team performance holistically. So it enables better decision making across engineering and delivery leadership. So if we go on to the next slide, there's three metrics that we're going to look at. So sprint capacity accuracy, sprint target completion, and scope change. For those of you that are Kanban teams or Scrumban teams and have a mixture of the two, when I go into the dashboard as well, I'll show you a couple of other metrics that you can use as well. So we'll go on to the predictability metrics. And so as an intro to predictability, it is essentially the heart of your effective delivery. So as I mentioned earlier, whether you're working in Scrum or Kanban or um, a hybrid model, your ability to be able to deliver what you plan and when you plan it affects everything from your morale to your business confidence. And so we see time and time again that sort of high performing teams aren't just fast, they're consistent. Stakeholders don't necessarily just want results, they want reliable timelines as well. And when you're able to sort of plan the activities in your roadmap and say I can deliver X, Y, and Z in a certain time frame, that's gold dust. And so the other aspect of this is also the engineers and the developers working under you. So for teams that are more predictable, engineers typically are more motivated. They feel in control of their work, they understand things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. And so what predictability does is it bridges the gap between planning and actual delivery, right? It helps leaders like yourselves set realistic goals, sorry, and it helps teams sort of stay focused, and it creates a data back foundation for continuous improvement and process improvement as well. So that is why predictability is so important. And so we'll go into some of the metrics that help you sort of understand how predictable you are as well. So the first metric here is sprint capacity accuracy. Now, this helps answer the question of, do we know our own limits? Like, it compares the total work completed to your initial commitment. So the formula is simple. It's your velocity divided by your initial commitment. And the ideal range, as you can see here, is between 91 to 109%. And that means that teams are planning sprints with a realistic sense of what they can achieve. Too far above that range, and that suggests that teams are either underloading, playing it safe. They know that there's work add that there's going to be sort of scope being added into the sprint, and therefore the planning for that. And too far below that range um, suggests they're underloading. So, and sorry, I think I've misspoken there. So too far below that range, and that means the team are underloading and playing it safe, and too far above that range means you're constantly overcommitting and then under delivering, and that's not where you want to be. So capacity accuracy is a critical input into your sprint planning hygiene. It's regularly reviewing this sort of allows teams to calibrate your expectations over time with this too. So that's the first one. And when we go into the dashboard, I'll show you how to configure that within the metric settings as well. The second one is your sprint target completion. So this metric focuses on what portion of the original work was originally completed. And so the reason why this is really important is because a good benchmark here is 70% or above, and below that suggests we're struggling to stay focused on plan work, or perhaps due to unexpected work or distractions. And so if we're completing our plan work, it means you've got a good planning rigor. It means that you're completing the things that you've committed to, and that you're on track to deliver what you're committing to as well, whether that be a larger initiative or a larger epic as well. So it is important not to treat this metric in isolation, because sometimes work isn't complete because it was descoped intentionally. But combined with some of the other metrics that we're going through now, it gives you a strong signal of delivery reliability as well. So that's target completion. And then when we go into our next slide, which is scope change. Scope change answers a question of how much of the plan shift during the sprint. It tracks a percentage of work added or removed mid-sprint, and frequent scope change disrupts team focus. It reduces delivery confidence. It increases the risk of missed goals, and this metric is really good for understanding whether teams are working in stable environments or constantly reacting to new inputs as well. And when we have a look at the metric, we can identify patterns of scope volatility, and help teams to see whether they need to improve their backlog refinement, whether they need to improve their stakeholder alignment, and then ultimately their sprint commitment accuracy as well. So I'll come out of here and I will show you, if this allows me to. Here we go. The dashboard that I've set up as well. So we've got the predictability dashboard here. Now, there's a couple of metrics in here that I've spoken about already. So we've got sprint capacity accuracy, as you can see here. Now, this is within Plandek's own workspace and instance. If I click on Explore, there we go. You'll be able to see there's a couple of tabs here that you can view and actually really try and get into what the data is trying to tell me. Now, this is just a sprint predictability metric. Now, in order to have a look at your sprint capacity accuracy, there's a couple of things we need to configure in the settings. So the first is making sure the velocity here is total completed tickets that were ever included in the sprint. So we're looking at your total velocity, and making sure that the commitment that you have is total tickets included at the start of the sprint. So we're only looking at the tickets that you've included from day one of that sprint, rather than the things that you've also included mid-sprint. And so we can see actually here that we can break down the commitment, we can see the velocity as well, and then we can also see in the orange line your sprint completion too. And clicking into these bars will allow you to actually look at the tickets in your ADO instance or your Jira instance and actually see what you've committed to, what issue type they are, whether they're still open or closed. And then we also have the hyperlink here, which can take you back to your Jira board or your ADO board to view that ticket too. I mentioned earlier there's a couple of different breakdown views here as well. So committed versus completed is my favorite one. And that is simply allowing you to have a look at this sprint by sprint, but also say, I can see what I have planned, I can see what I have carried over, and I can also see what I've committed, added into the sprint too, and how much of that in those three sectors have I completed. So I can openly see in, let's say, snowstorm sprint 58, I can see I had 21 tickets that I planned for, but I only completed 9. But when I have a look at the committed added tickets, so 14, and I completed 11. So that's sort of having a look and saying, okay, like I can see there's a large amount of work added here, which is actually contributing potentially to me not completing some of the initial work that I have planned too. So we can see there's a couple of things in here as well which people find really interesting. The first is carried over work, so as a percentage, how much work are you carrying over from sprint to sprint, which obviously we want to keep that as low as possible, because the more work you carry over and the more you cannibalize the actual time that you have within your current sprint to be able to deliver what you need to deliver and what you've initially planned, and that can come into a vicious cycle as well. So the more you carry over, the less and less time sprint by sprint you will have to then actually reach your goals and reach your milestones and your targets. And that epic due date that you have eventually slips. Um, and that ultimately costs money and it impacts how much value you can deliver throughout the year or throughout the time frame of your roadmap. The scope change gross and scope change percentage as well is really cool too. So we can see here on a sprint by sprint basis how much scope was added and how much was removed. And the one thing I want to point out is this is currently in tickets, but for those of you that story points, you can also select story points here as well. Um, so so yeah, the last thing I wanted to point out is also the volatility, and this is a really, really important measure of predictability within this metric. And it kind of allows you to just have a look at this figure and have a look at see whether it's high, low, medium, and just ultimately decide, okay, are we predictable or not? And the reason this is cool is because we have a look at your velocity over over time. So over your team's completion, and we can see here actually, we can set the summary value for all sprints and we can set it for the last three or the last five sprints. So if I do it for the last five, the metric will update, and it might take a second or two. But a high volatility score essentially means that your velocity is changing a lot between the sprints, and that makes it harder to plan and forecast. So, a low volatility score suggests stable and predictable throughput. We know how many story points, how many tickets you're completing sprint by sprint, and that means you can actually plan towards when your deliverable is going to be complete and delivered. And so, the volatility is especially useful for sort of long-term planning for making sure that you have confidence within your team as well. But if the volatility is high, like I mentioned earlier, the delivery dates will shift frequently. And if it's low, you can commit your teams and your deliverables with more certainty as well. So um, I do want to say as well, I know I've rambled for a little bit for the first 15 minutes here, but if you do have any questions, the Q&A is open, and I will answer them as we go on. I do want the session to be as collaborative as possible. So if you do have any questions on anything that I've mentioned so far, um, please feel free to ask in the Q&A, and I will answer them as soon as I see them. Um, but yeah, I'll come out of here. I'll scroll down a little bit too. So you can see here the sprint target completion metric that we also spoke about too, which is, measuring how much you've completed of the original committed work by sprint end. So we can see it's typically around the sort of 70% mark for this team, and the last two sprints we can see it's actually dropped a lot. And when you scroll up, if we go back into the sprint capacity accuracy metric and click on committed versus completed, I'm just going to pin this view as well. So the pin to dashboard button essentially means that you can see that within the dashboard rather than having to click into explore. You can see actually that over the last two sprints, the initial work was sacrificed to complete the work added. So you can see here for sprint 58, the committed planned, the initial work was 21 tickets and we only completed 9. And the same for sprint 59, it was 16 tickets and we only completed 7. But when we have a look at the work added, there's 14 tickets and we completed 11 for sprint 58, and for 59 it was 15 and we completed 9. So there was obviously a shift of focus, which is why the initial or the sprint target completion was rather low for the last two sprints. And we actually have another metric if I scroll further down called work added completion. Now this one's important too. So we're essentially coming in here and saying, okay, like when we change the plan mid sprint, do we finish the work that we add? And this is critical because mid-sprint editions often come from, unplanned stakeholder requests or instant responses or, a bit of ambiguous backlog grooming. But constantly adding large amounts of work can disrupt that team focus. And if that work doesn't get completed, it leads to more rollover and more rework. And it comes back to the point of cannibalizing your time and your effort to actually deliver new value in the upcoming sprints. And so by tracking this metric, you as team leads can actually establish strong controls and scope creep. You can handle better the urgent work that comes in without jeopardizing some of your sprint goals. So having a look at these three together and understanding, okay, what is my scope change? What is my sprint completion? Um, am I completing my initial planned work? But also, if I am adding scope in, am I completing that too? And ultimately, that gives us a handle on trying to understand whether we're predictable and whether we're not. Now, I've added a couple of metrics in here for teams that may necessarily not use sprints and might be a little bit more Kanban focused. And so the first one is a completed tickets metric, and I've renamed this as weekly throughput. This is essentially the completed tickets metric broken down by issue type. So if I click on Explore here, this may just take a second to load again. So I do apologize, but if I click on breakdowns, you can see here that I've broken down by issue type and chosen as a chart type the stats chart here. And so what this does is it allows me as a Kanban team to measure the number of tickets that I've delivered to completion over the certain time period, which in this case is the last 12 weeks. And so more important than the actual throughput is that trend over time and how this reflects potential challenges or the team's experience. So we can see here that on a week by week basis, which is where this is broken down, we can see how many tickets we're completing and delivering, and whether there's a massive spike or trough in what we're trying to deliver. And so we can see here that there's a number of tickets um, that have reduced from a week by week basis, and there's definitely peaks. But we can also see, breaking it down by issue type, what types of work are we delivering? So are we spending a certain particular week, or is there a trend in spending a couple of weeks together just focused on bugs? And was that due to a quality issue? Was that due to something else? And for tasks and stories, are we made primarily focused on sort of delivering value work as well? And so yeah, this allows you to try and understand that. And then the last metric I have here is, we scroll down a little bit here, is this created stories versus completed stories. So we filtered this on user stories, but I just want to show you how to create an overlay as well for those of you that might not understand how to do it or have not done it before. There is an add overlay button here. So you would create your metric as initially planned. So for here we used created work, and then I added the overlay completed work, which is just here. And then that allows you to see two or more metrics at the same time. So the current limit is 3. So if I did want to add another metric in, I can do that too. But created versus completed is really interesting, and it's a very effective metric that allows you to essentially go, what is the input and output versus my team in that given time period, and what is the maturity and the ability of my team to meet the demand, but also and the capacity as well. So if we drill down this into specific issue types, we can sort of identify whether there's certain bugs that are being created in these specific peaks as well. But on face value, this is very simple but very effective, especially for Kanban teams to understand, okay, like are we actually getting through all the work that we've created over that past 12 weeks or any other given time period? And if we're not, that backlog then means it's growing, and what do we need to do to try and rectify that as well? So yeah, I can see here there isn't any open questions yet, so that's fine. But I did just want to quickly, as a bonus, go over a little bit of Smart View as well. So I go into Smart View now. And I just want to caveat everything before we go into Smart View. So all the dashboards that you have seen previously and all the metrics that you saw previously were retrospective. They were based on completed tickets or completed sprints or releases. And because that allows us to look back historically and see how you perform through that completion. But what we did understand then is that Plandek was predicated heavily on lessons learned. So we get to an end of a sprint, we then look at the metrics to see how we've performed as a team, and you have that retrospective, and then you take some actions to try and improve that performance. What you then had was a lack of visibility in terms of waiting for the next sprint to see if those actions have actually improved performance. And that's why we built these things called actionable insights. And within them, we've got smart view sprints and smart view epics. Now, over here, we'll in this drop down, you'll see the current active sprint. So we're in Team Snowstorm Sprint 60. And the first thing I wanted to point out is we can have a look at the sprint progress in tickets or in story points. So currently it's within story points. And as a team lead, it's quite useful because we can see, first of all, okay, how many story points do we have in to do? How many do we have in progress? And how many do we have as done? And so against each of the tickets, we have a look at the sort of historic data that you have within your sprints, and we build insights off the back of them. Now, for Smart View sprints, there's 10, and we can see here, if I go into, let's say we've got 13, 13 story points in progress, and against those tickets, we've got 13 insights. So if I click on the insights here, I can actually see, okay, I can have a look at all tickets that are currently in a to-do status, or I can have a look at tickets with new insights as well. And over here, this will list all the tickets that have insights against them. So let's see, if I click on this first one, which is create query to calculate epic data, and there's 8 story points against this. The first thing it will tell me is this issue has not been carried over from your previous sprint, has been carried over, sorry, from your previous sprint without being completed. So it's just allowing you to go into this and say, there may be something here that you might need to action and take a look at rather than wait for the retro. Let's try and action it in the middle of the sprint and try and get it done. And the aim for this is essentially, in order to be more predictable, in order to have a handle on what you're delivering, when you're delivering, and completing as much as you can during the sprint, this is really, really helpful in terms of understanding where your current sprint is at and trying to highlight any potential issues that may cause you to potentially not complete those tickets or those tasks. So if I go into, let's try and find another insight that might be a little bit useful. This issue was added after the first day of the sprint. So straight away, the issue was added to the sprint 4 days after the sprint had started. Now that can sometimes, in a standard stand-up, um, you know, sneak through and people may not notice that. But going into a smart view sprints page here, we can actually see, okay, like I can see this ticket, I can understand where we're at, I can speak to the developer. We can see this one's been unassigned, but if it has been assigned to someone, I can speak to the developer and see, okay, like why was it added in mid sprint? What can we do to finish it? Do we have enough scope and bandwidth to finish that off as well? So I just want to highlight a couple of others. So we can see here, sprint burn down. So 21 tickets should have been closed by now, but you've closed 16. There's carryovers, work added, tickets without commits. And we can also see here, there's a couple of others here too. So now it's all based on your historic completion. So we won't necessarily have insights against all the tickets if there doesn't need to be one. But we can see here tickets without commits. If I click on more details, I can see the ticket that this is being brought up against. And I can see there's 2 insights here. So the first being, the incident is taking longer than usual in the status and development. And we can see, the incident has been in status and development for 6 days, which is above the normal threshold of 4 days compared to other incidents without story points in this workspace. So it's just here to try and say and help you, okay, this might be something that you need to acknowledge and understand and speak to Richard and say, what do we need to do to try and complete this? It's taken longer than usual. I can see historically it would take 4 days, but now it's taken 6. Is there anything you need from me? Is there any help that you need? Do we need to factor in something else? And you can acknowledge these. So if you can click on the thumbs up mark here, it will disappear. Yeah, so I'll quickly scroll down to probably a couple of my favorite views here. So we have your standard sprint up and sprint burn down and burn up chart here. So we can see ideally we want to get that pink, which is done as a full bar by the 28th, by the time the sprint ends. So again, it's one of the things here that is really cool is the functionality in SmartView sprints removes the need for you to constantly switch between the tool that you're using for issue tracking. So whether that be Jira or ADO, and switching between Plandek, everything that you have is here. All the analytics that you need is here to understand where your current sprint is at, what issues you have within your current sprint, the risk for your sprint too. Um, but also, when we break it down into the developers that you have within the sprint as well, we can see, you know, the sprint activity, which developers have tickets in progress, which developers have tickets in new, what can we do to try and refactor some of this work to make sure that people don't feel overloaded. But my favorite view is is this one, which replicates what we have within the stand-up. And I wish I had something like this when I was a delivery lead as well, which is I can filter here and filter on all tickets within sites. I can click on issue status and see, okay, cool. Like I want to have a look at the tickets that I have in development. And I can filter by issue type as well. So whether that's story, incident, or task. I can also filter by priority and then the assignee as well. So that whole stand-up um, process and session that we go through every morning, trying to understand what we have as blockers and trying to understand what we need to do to try and complete all the tickets, whether that be the initial commitment or the work added, to get to the end of the sprint with full completion. I can do that here, and the added benefit is I can highlight the tickets that have insights and say, okay, there's a fixing cache refresher cron job ticket here. Let me click on the insight. The issue was added after the first day of the sprint. It was added midway through the sprint. Okay, I'll speak to Norbert and see what needs to be done to try and finish that off. And is that a risk of some of the other tickets that he has in his to-do list as well? So yeah. There's a question. Apologies if I missed it, but what are the thresholds for medium, high volatility and capacity accuracy? Okay, so let's go back to. Sorry, apologies. Let's go back to the predictability dashboard. We'll click on Explore here. And if we click onto the volatility button here, you can see the thresholds here. So volatility would be a score of between 0 and 15, sorry, low volatility rather. Medium would be between 16 and 30. And high volatility would be 31 plus. Now, we can actually show you how we calculate that too. So we can click on Show My Calculations. And we can see here, we take your average sprint we take your sprint velocities over the past 5 sprints. Now, you can change that to the past 3 sprints or all sprints within the metric settings on the right-hand side. We calculate the mean average, the sample standard deviation, and then we run this calculation as well to understand your volatility score. So Joseph, I hope that answers your question there as well. So that is how we calculate it, and these are the thresholds for it as well. So yeah, if anyone is a little bit confused around how that volatility score is calculated, it is just a simple click on where it says medium, high, low volatility here, and then it will open out this pane for you to A, understand it, but B, also see the calculation behind that too. I think the last thing I wanted to do, no worries, Joseph. The last thing I wanted to do, seeing as we don't have too many questions as well, is just wrapping up the session. So if I go back to the slides, and then just from here as well. So the turning metrics into action, I think. So this is just to wrap up here. So understanding the metrics is the first step that you have, right? And it's the real value comes from when we use these insights to drive business outcomes. So, how do we translate those predictability metrics into turning into sort of tangible impact, if you like? And that's where I thought these 5 would be a nice way to sort of wrap up the session. So the first being improved planning reliability. So, predictable teams make it easier for businesses to forecast releases, to manage dependencies, and commit to customers with confidence. Increased stakeholder trust is it's consistent delivery signals maturity ultimately, and it builds credibility with your executives, it builds credibility with your product leaders, and clients too, and it leads to stronger alignment, and ultimately it leads to better decisions on investment as well. If the business and the execs know what you need to deliver or what you're going to deliver at a certain time, they can allocate that resource more effectively. And so the third is reduced delivery risk. And so we've seen with smart view sprints and by highlighting early warning signs, but also having a look at some of the metrics and seeing, is there constant scope creep? Is there volatile sprint capacity? You know, these metrics allow you to intervene before problems escalate. And then higher team morale and retention. And this is one I think people skip a lot. It's teams that consistently meet goals feel more motivated and less stressed. So predictability supports the pace at which teams work at, but also it helps prevent burnout. There's less context switching, there's more focus on the things that they actually need to deliver, and they're more comfortable in their own skin, delivering what they know they need to. And the last kind of ties in with the first thing, which is better investment decisions. And that is, your delivery consistency helps you assess where engineering is either under strain or you're overperforming, and it helps shape smarter resource allocation and strategic planning as well. So yeah, that is um, the end of my presentation rather. But yeah, more than happy to take any questions now for a bit of a Q&A. And if there aren't any questions, then I'm more than happy to take those offline as well. If you do feel more comfortable having a chat and messaging me either on Slack or on Teams or in the product chat, then there is myself and our colleagues to help you through that as well. But if you have any further questions or would like any support implementing these metrics into your team, um, feel free to get in touch. The last thing I wanted to mention actually before I go is, and I should have mentioned this earlier, so I do apologize to everybody, is we do have a predictability metrics template. So on manage dashboards here in the bottom left, whenever you are in a dashboard, if you click on manage dashboards, and Plandek template, so the bottom one here, or sorry, the middle one rather, and scroll down, you will see the predictability template here. So if you click on this and click on add dashboard, all the metrics that you've seen today in today's session, they will be imported into your workspace and into a predictability dashboard. And that will enable you to configure those metrics however you like, and also help you start understanding what do I need to do to become more predictable, and how can that impact your business outcomes as well. So yeah, thank you all and thank you for joining. And oh, sorry, Jack, I see a question there. Would you recommend using actionable insights as a core element of stand-up ceremonies, or as an and when type activity when insights are available? I would recommend using this as a core element. I think embedding smart view sprints into your sprint ceremonies is a really, really good way of essentially making sure that you are delivering as much as you can within the sprint. And we have noticed that teams that do use smart view sprints, particularly within their agile and sprint ceremonies, have a much higher completion rate and actually deliver things on time, and there's always more scope for them to deliver more value as well. So I would definitely recommend to use smart view sprints within your sprint ceremonies. That is my recommendation. Okay, perfect. I think that is the last of the questions we have. So, okay, thank you for joining, and I hope you have the rest of a great rest of the day. And I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you, everybody.